Welcome back to the journey through 1980. In a world where love is a thought crime, even a glance can be dangerous. But when Winston receives a secret note with three impossible words, "I love you," his world tilts off its axis. What begins as suspicion becomes longing, and what begins in silence blooms into rebellion. This chapter takes us from the fluorescent corridors of the ministry to the hidden meadows of forbidden freedom. Are these two souls truly falling in love, or falling into the trap of hope? In the sterile, tightly monitored corridors of the Ministry of Truth, a moment of apparent accident sets the course of a quiet revolution. Winston, having left his cubicle to go to the lavatory, sees Julia, the girl with dark hair, walking toward him. Her right arm is in a sling, a workplace injury that draws little concern in a world where pain is routine and compassion is dangerous. As she approaches, she stumbles and falls directly onto her injured arm. Despite every instinct warning him of danger, Winston instinctively rushes to help her. What he doesn't realize is that in those few seconds of contact, she slips a folded note into his hand. Winston manages to conceal the note and resist the temptation to read it immediately, aware that every movement is likely being monitored. Back in the fragile illusion of privacy at his desk, he finally unfolds a scrap of paper. What he finds is not a warning or a threat, but a simple, jarring phrase: "I love you." This act of vulnerability, embedded in a few innocent words, sends shockwaves through Winston's entire being. He is stunned, not just by the content of the note, but by the audacity of the act itself. For hours, he battles a rising tide of emotion. The note haunts him. He cannot concentrate on his work. Every glance toward a telescreen feels like exposure. At lunch, the banality of conversation and the oppressive atmosphere of the canteen add to the surreal contrast between his inner world and the external reality. Parsons rambles about hate week and patriotic children building a grotesque papier-mâché head of Big Brother, while Winston struggles to control his trembling heart. Somewhere in the room, Julia sits at another table, pretending not to notice him. That afternoon, a more delicate falsification assignment momentarily allows Winston to focus, fabricating past production figures to undermine a now disgraced party member. For a short while, he forgets the note and the woman who delivered it. But later, during yet another meaningless evening at the community center, where forced enthusiasm masks the spiritual wasteland of party life, the words "I love you" return to him like a pulse in his bloodstream. Suddenly, he no longer wants to avoid danger. He wants to live. That night, alone in bed in the silence that telescreens cannot breach, Winston begins to think practically. The problem now is not whether the message was a trap, he is convinced it wasn't, but how to arrange a meeting. He cycles through potential strategies: intercepting her after work, sending a letter, loitering near the fiction department, but none are viable. The party has eliminated spontaneity and isolated everyone in invisible cages. In the end, he decides the canteen offers the best chance. It is public enough to hide in, yet noisy enough for a brief exchange. Days pass in torment. The next day, Julia enters the canteen just as Winston is leaving. The day after that, she is seated beneath a telescreen, surrounded by others. Then for 3 days, she vanishes altogether. Winston becomes hypersensitive. Every sound, every human interaction feels like an invasion. Her absence is like a wound, and the thought that she might have been vaporized or simply changed her mind leaves him hollow. When she finally returns, her sling is gone and her wrist is bandaged. Their eyes meet briefly. The next day, he nearly reaches her. She sits alone, and Winston is just meters away when a coworker interrupts, calling his name and forcing him to change course. He smiles weakly, hiding his fury, while the girls' table fills with others. Still, he hopes she has noticed. The following day, she is alone again. Winston cues for food, willing the line to move faster. Another man, suspicious, insect-like, heads for her table. Then a sudden crash. The man has fallen. His tray spills across the floor. Winston, heart pounding, takes the opportunity and sits down at Julia's table. They don't speak immediately. Everything depends on timing. Then, with no eye contact and in low, expressionless voices, they finally communicate. They plan to meet at Victory Square, near the monument, at 19 hours. No signs, no acknowledgement, just proximity. Winston arrives early. He waits, his nerves on edge. When she appears, pretending to read a poster, they are separated by telescreens and party surveillance. Then, as if on cue, chaos erupts. A convoy of Eurasian prisoners passes through the square, drawing a crowd. Julia slips into the mass of people, and Winston follows. They stand shoulder to shoulder. She begins to murmur directions, barely moving her lips. The instructions are precise. A route through the countryside, a meeting point at a moss-covered tree. He listens intently, committed to memory every turn and landmark. Their fingers find each other for a fleeting moment in the crowd, a secret handshake of defiance. That brief contact is their bond, their resistance, their oath. Julia disappears into the sea of bodies. Winston is left standing still, heart brimming with impossible longing. Days later, Winston makes the journey to the appointed place. The countryside is foreign yet familiar, a forgotten memory made real. He walks through lanes dotted with bluebells, sunshine filtering through the branches. When she arrives, she leads him silently into a hidden clearing. Here, in nature's quiet sanctuary, they speak freely for the first time. The contrast between their vulnerable words and the party's repression is stark. She tells him her name, Julia. He tells her everything, his age, his fears, even his revulsion and rage at the party. She responds with laughter, kindness, and chocolate from the black market. Their bond deepens. He learns she has had other lovers, all party members, and rather than feel betrayed, he is invigorated. Her corruption is not a flaw, it is a sign of her rebellion. Her joy in sex, her hatred of purity, her craving for real sensation. These are the seeds of insurrection. Together, they cling to the belief that desire itself is a weapon. In the sun-drenched clearing, they make love. It is clumsy, imperfect, but transformative. Their bodies merge not only in passion, but in purpose. Afterwards, they sleep briefly, wrapped in the illusion of peace. Winston watches Julia as she rests, her freckles soft in the afternoon light. He reflects on her imperfections, her ordinary beauty, and the impossible purity of a moment untainted by the party. Their union is not romanticized, it is not safe, it is not permanent. But in that instant, it is real, and for that reason, it is sacred. And as Winston later realizes, it was more than intimacy, it was resistance in its rawest form, a private blow against the machine, a spark in the dark. In a world silenced by fear, where every gesture is monitored and every whisper can betray you, a quiet, seemingly insignificant encounter between two individuals unfolds with profound intensity. Orwell begins with an ordinary scene, Winston stepping out of his cubicle to go to the lavatory, but quickly transforms this mundane moment into a turning point. A girl with dark hair approaches from the end of the corridor. 4 days have passed since he last saw her. Her arm, now in a sling, hints at an injury sustained during the mechanical drudgery of her department. As their paths near, she stumbles. The pain from her wounded arm must have been intense. And in that moment, despite everything Winston has feared about her, despite believing she might be an informant, he reacts like a human being. In the moment when he had seen her fall on the bandaged arm, it had been as though he felt the pain in his own body. That sentence carries quiet power. In a system designed to sever empathy, compassion still survives. Instinctively, Winston helps her up. The act is brief, seconds at most. But in those few seconds, she presses something into his hand. The note, small and square, is smuggled in an act that is both dangerous and deeply intimate. Winston doesn't dare read it immediately. Surveillance is constant. Even the lavatory isn't safe. Back in the illusion of privacy at his desk, he prepares himself, bracing for a warning, a trap, perhaps even a death sentence. Instead, he finds only 3 words: I love you. It's a stunning moment, not because the phrase itself is unusual, but because of its context. In Oceania, love is criminal. Intimacy, desire, tenderness, all are treated as weaknesses to be eradicated. And yet, here it is, a declaration not only of feeling, but of defiance. Winston is frozen. His heart pounds. He reads it again. He cannot believe what he sees, and yet, at a deeper level, something begins to stir. The fire of forbidden emotion flickers into life. He tries to return to his duties, but the world no longer feels the same. The telescreen watches as he fumbles through routine tasks. His mind drifts. His chest burns with emotion. He felt as though a fire were burning in his belly. That line encapsulates the turmoil. Hope ignited in a place where hope was meant to die. At lunch, things get worse. The canteen is crowded, hot, noisy. Parsons, loyal, loud, and oblivious, talks endlessly about hate week preparations in the papier-mâché head of Big Brother. In the midst of all this noise, Winston struggles to stay still, to seem normal. He glimpses Julia at a distant table. She gives no sign of recognition. The afternoon brings a respite. Winston is assigned delicate work, forging past production reports to discredit a fallen party official. It's a task he's good at, and for a short while he loses himself in it. But eventually her face returns to his thoughts, and along with it, an overwhelming desire to be alone, to think, to plan. That night at the community center, he forces himself through the rituals of party life, discussion groups, table tennis, cheap gin, and a lecture about ingsoc and chess. His boredom is deep, but his conviction is newly sharpened. At the sight of the words "I love you," the desire to stay alive had welled up in him. Suddenly, small risks, absences, glances, silences seem not brave but foolish. What matters now is living, really living. Later that night in bed, Winston can finally think. For the first time, he no longer considers that the note may be a trap. Julia had been afraid, visibly, palpably so. He trusts her, at least enough to try. He remembers her trembling, her pale face, the flutter in her voice. He thinks too of her body, of a dream where she appeared youthful and free. Just days ago, he had wanted to crush her skull with a cobblestone. Now, that thought feels distant, irrelevant. She is no longer a threat, but a possibility. A door cracked open. Yet even as his desire rises, so too does his sense of futility. How can one act of connection survive in a society that monitors every breath? Every method of communication he imagines is fraught with risk. He cannot visit her department. He doesn't know her name, her address. Letters are out of the question. They are all opened, examined, erased. Even following her home would it be suspicious. It was like trying to make a move at chess when you were already mated. The metaphor is perfect. He is cornered, but not defeated. Eventually, he sees one small hope, the canteen. In the noise and crowd, there may be space, 30 seconds perhaps, for words. Not many, but enough. In the days that follow, Winston lives in a state of quiet torment. Some days she doesn't appear. Others, she's under a telescreen or surrounded by friends. The hope that had lit up inside him begins to flicker. Perhaps she was reassigned. Perhaps she was vaporized. Or worse, perhaps she changed her mind. The pain of uncertainty eats at him. And yet, this agony is evidence of something precious. It proves he still feels. He is still human. At last, she returns. Her wrist is bandaged now, no longer in a sling. Their eyes meet briefly. He dares not approach. But the next day, fortune turns. She sits alone. He edges toward her table. And then, an interruption. A coworker calls out his name, friendly and loud. Winston has no choice but to abandon his plan. He smiles, sits elsewhere, and fights the urge to scream. The girl's table fills again, but she must have noticed him. Surely she saw. The next day, the miracle occurs. She is alone once more, and he manages to reach her table. A nearby man stumbles, creating a commotion, and Winston slips into the seat across from her. They don't look at each other. They barely speak, but in low, steady voices, they agree to meet. Victory Square, near the monument, 19 hours. No signals, no greetings, no contact, just presence. That night, Winston stands in Victory Square. He's early, nervous. She's not there. Fear claws at him again. Perhaps she's not coming. But then he sees her pretending to read a poster. Before he can move, a sudden distraction. A convoy of Eurasian prisoners rolls by. The crowd surges. Julia slips into the throng and Winston follows. Shoulder to shoulder now, they murmur a plan, a path, a destination. Her voice is precise, steady. He memorizes every word. And finally, just before the moment ends, her hand finds his. 10 seconds. That's all. But in those 10 seconds, a bond is formed that feels as powerful as any revolution. This part of 1984 reminds us that in the darkest places, the smallest sparks shine brightest. Winston and Julia's connection begins not with speeches or banners, but with a fall, a note, a whisper. Their rebellion is personal, quiet, human. In a system built to destroy love, they choose it anyway. And that choice, however fleeting, however dangerous, is what makes them free. For a week after receiving Julia's secret message, Winston lived in a dreamlike state, a haze of longing and dread. The canteen, once just a place of routine, became a silent stage for waiting and disappointment. Some days she was nowhere to be seen. On others, she appeared just as Winston was leaving or sat surrounded by others beneath the ever-watchful telescreens. Then for 3 torturous days, she vanished entirely. During those days, Winston's sensitivity heightened unbearably. Every word, every sound, every look became a source of anguish. Her absence made the world feel hollow. Even his dreams couldn't provide refuge, and though he avoided his diary, the ache of anticipation persisted. Then, like a sudden break in clouded skies, she returned. The sling was gone from her arm, replaced by a small bandage around her wrist. The simple sight of her made Winston's heart surge with silent gratitude. The next day, he nearly spoke to her. She sat alone at a table. Winston approached, timing everything with casual precision. Just as he neared, someone called his name. Wilshire, with a dopey grin and an empty seat at his table. Winston couldn't refuse. He smiled politely, though in his mind, he imagined striking Wilshire down with a pickaxe. Still, he clung to hope. The next day, Winston arrived early. She was there again, alone. Just as his heart began to lift, a small, suspicious-looking man made for her table. Winston followed, despair threatening to return, until the man slipped, food flying everywhere. It seemed like fate. A heartbeat later, Winston sat across from Julia. They didn't exchange glances. With practiced stillness, they unpacked their trays and began to eat. Winston whispered the words they'd both been waiting to speak. "What time do you leave work?" 18:30. "Where can we meet?" "Victory Square, near the monument." "It's full of telescreens. It doesn't matter if there's a crowd." "Any signal?" "No, don't come up to me until you see me among a lot of people. And don't look at me. Just keep somewhere near me." "What time?" 19 hours. "All right." And just like that, their conversation was over. Winston stayed behind, finishing his meal and smoking a cigarette while Julia slipped away. That evening, Winston reached Victory Square early. He wandered near the monument, restless and tense, his thoughts a storm of what-ifs. Had she changed her mind? Was this a trap? Then he saw her, leaning casually by the base of the column, pretending to read a poster. He didn't move toward her. Instead, fate again intervened. Shouting broke out. followed by the thunder of approaching vehicles. A convoy of Eurasian prisoners was passing. The crowd surged. Julia slipped into the throng. Winston followed. Shoulder to shoulder, they stood as the prisoners rolled by, rows of weary, shackled men with blank faces and dead eyes. Julia leaned into Winston, murmuring with barely moving lips. "Can you hear me?" she asked. "Yes," he whispered back. In a few short sentences, she outlined everything: where to go, how to get there, what landmarks to follow. Her voice was like a map etched in his mind. "You turn left, then right, then left again," she said. "The gates got no top bar." He committed every word to memory. "Then get away from me as quick as you can." At the last moment, hidden by the crowd, her hand found his. The squeeze was brief, fleeting, but filled with meaning. Winston didn't even know the color of her eyes, yet that touch made her more real than ever before. What followed was not merely an exchange between lovers. It was an act of rebellion, a whisper of hope against a regime built to crush both. Their hands, locked for those 10 seconds, defied everything: the party, fear, isolation. And as they stood still, gazing ahead, it was not her eyes that Winston remembered, but the eyes of an aged prisoner in the convoy, staring out from a nest of hair with mournful intensity. The glance lingered. It reminded Winston that even in moments of connection, danger was never far. In this moment, George Orwell's world reveals a profound truth: intimacy is resistance. Every move between Winston and Julia must be coded, every word rehearsed, every glance calculated. Yet even within that cold, choking surveillance, they carve a space for warmth. Not just romantic love, but human recognition, something deeper than slogans or dogma. The journey from suspicion to trust, from loathing to desire, isn't just Winston's personal arc. It's symbolic. It reflects how totalitarian regimes fracture relationships, how fear seeps into love, and how even a moment of tenderness can carry the weight of revolt. Julia's touch, her boldness, her clarity, all contrast with Winston's tremors and doubts. But together they move towards something braver. The lesson here is simple yet searing. In a world that punishes love, choosing to care is an act of war. Their hands, joined in secret, speak louder than any manifesto. And their story, in its slow unfolding, reminds us that even when stripped of freedom, language, and safety, human hearts still seek each other out. And that, perhaps, is the beginning of liberation. For a week, Winston lived not as a citizen of Oceania, but as a man suspended between dread and fragile hope. After receiving Julia's clandestine message, "I love you," the world had changed, though no one else could see it. The ministry's gray walls remained unmoved. The telescreens still hummed with their silent menace, and slogans of the party echoed through every corridor. But within Winston, a storm brewed, tender and volatile. Each day, the canteen became his theater of expectation. Would she appear? Would her presence acknowledge what had passed between them? Even if just through a glance. Sometimes she came late, just as he was leaving. Other times, she sat among others beneath the harsh eye of a telescreen. And then, nothing. For 3 agonizing days, she vanished. No explanation, no sign, and no safe way to ask. Winston's body became a vessel of hypersensitivity. Every sound, every step, every interruption was unbearable. Her absence haunted his sleep. Even the diary remained untouched, as if words would betray his longing. And then, she returned. He noticed first the bandage replacing the sling, a small detail that set his heart in motion. That simple sight, mundane to others, was for him proof of continuation, of survival. The next day, their distance was nearly bridged. Julia sat alone. Winston approached, carefully calculated steps masking inner desperation. But at the critical moment, a voice shattered his momentum. "Smith!" It was Wilshire with his vacant grin and trivial invitation. There was no refusal safe enough. Winston obeyed, smiling as if nothing within him had broken. In his mind, he smashed Wilshire's face with a pickaxe. Yet hope is persistent. He arrived early the next day. She was there, again alone. This time, another threat emerged. A small, sharp-eyed man moved toward her table. The moment felt stolen by chance once more, until the man slipped, tray clattering, liquid spreading. Winston moved. Seconds later, he sat across from Julia. They didn't look at one another. They didn't smile. And yet, the silent rhythm of their meal carried more weight than the loudest proclamation. Words, barely mouthed, bridged the chasm of surveillance. What time do you leave work? 18:30? Where can we meet? Victory Square, near the monument. It's full of telescreens. It doesn't matter if there's a crowd. So simple, so dangerous. Their exchange was a careful choreography, one that had to be flawless. One misstep meant doom. Julia left swiftly. Winston remained, smoking a cigarette as if nothing had passed. But everything had. That evening, Winston wandered Victory Square before the appointed hour. Statues of distant war heroes and symbols of eternal surveillance towered above him. He wondered, had she changed her mind? Was this all a ploy? But then he saw her, nonchalant at the base of the monument, pretending to read a poster. He didn't move toward her. Instead, fate intervened. A roar of vehicles broke the square's rhythm. A convoy of Eurasian prisoners approached, and with it came the crowd. Julia vanished into it. Winston followed. Soon they were pressed together, shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by flesh and tension. She spoke without moving her lips. "Can you hear me?" He answered, "Yes." And then came the instructions, delivered with military clarity. A hidden place, a secret path, landmarks etched into memory. It was less a meeting plan and more an act of sacred rebellion. She ended with, "Then get away from me as quick as you can." Before they parted, her hand found his. In that moment, their clasped fingers were a revolution. He didn't even know the color of her eyes. That single moment, 10 seconds of contact, held the emotional gravity of their world. Where love was forbidden, where privacy was non-existent, this gesture became a sacred act. They stood in a sea of strangers as faceless prisoners passed by as the regime marched on. And yet, their moment remained untouched. The eyes Winston remembered were not Julia's, but the mournful eyes of an aged prisoner, staring from behind a beard, wrists crossed as if in surrender. That contrast lingered. Freedom imagined, in captivity endured. Love whispered, in control imposed. This part of Orwell's narrative isn't merely plot progression. It's a revelation. In a world meticulously engineered to destroy spontaneity, connection, and trust, even fleeting intimacy becomes insurgent. Every touch, every word is subversive. The party cannot allow love because love implies loyalty to something other than itself. And here lies the deeper truth. In totalitarian regimes, it is not tanks or slogans that maintain power. It is isolation. By severing bonds between individuals, the party ensures submission. Fear replaces faith. Suspicion replaces affection. But Winston and Julia defy this design. Their bond is not built on ideology or shared belief. It is carved from instinct, defiance, and an ache to reclaim their humanity. Julia in these passages is a paradox. Her boldness, her plan, her voice, all contrast with Winston's hesitations. She represents a different kind of resistance, not one of grand philosophy, but of physical assertion. She is direct, efficient, unapologetic. Winston, by contrast, is emotional, reflective, wounded by the world, and unsure how to heal. Together they form a precarious alliance, not just of lovers, but of two broken people seeking wholeness through each other. Their story teaches several lessons. First, the need for connection is elemental. No ideology, no oppression can erase the human longing to be seen, to be touched, to be known. Second, silence and subtlety are powerful tools of resistance. Their entire communication, full of caution, conveys volume. They speak in half glances, hushed words, coded gestures, but the meaning is thunderous. Third, even the smallest acts of courage have profound ripple effects. Julia's note, her touch, her clarity, each is a rebellion, and Winston's willingness to act on them, despite his fears, signals the quiet revolution brewing within him. Lastly, Orwell reminds us that control thrives in the absence of tenderness. When people are kept apart, when their hearts are caged, regimes win. But when two souls, even under surveillance, dare to reach for each other, the foundations of tyranny tremble. In the end, it isn't the act of meeting or escaping detection that matters most. It is the assertion, quietly and fully, of being alive, of choosing love, even in its most dangerous form, of choosing each other. Their story isn't just about rebellion, it's about reclaiming what it means to be human. And that is where liberation begins. In the filtered golden light of a May morning, Winston Smith walked carefully along a winding path through the countryside, his footsteps falling softly on a carpet of bluebells that misted the ground beneath budding trees. There was a gentle kiss in the air, a softness to the light and sound that felt alien to the life he had come to know within the iron grip of the party. As the droning of doves echoed through the branches and the warmth of spring surrounded him, he felt momentarily detached from the reality of telescreens and suspicion. It was May 2nd, and for the first time in years, Winston was on a path towards something spontaneous and human. An illicit rendezvous with a dark-haired girl whose presence had both disturbed and fascinated him. He was early. The journey had gone smoothly, and the girl's apparent confidence in planning their secret meeting helped ease some of his usual paranoia. Still, he remained wary. Even though the countryside lacked telescreens, hidden microphones could be anywhere, and any unsanctioned movement was cause for suspicion. Travel without special documentation for distances under 100 kilometers was technically allowed, but still attracted the wrong kind of attention. At railway stations, patrols could demand to see identification, and anything resembling solitude was inherently subversive. The regime's language even had a term for it: own life, a dangerous affection for privacy and individuality. The train had been crowded with proles and holiday spirits, a rare slice of normalcy. In the same carriage, a massive extended family bustled with chatter and laughter. A great-grandmother with no teeth, a baby just a month old, and everyone in between had pressed around Winston, not knowing or caring who he was. They were off to see in-laws and hunt for contraband butter. It was a vivid contrast to party life, messy, loud, unregulated, and Winston soaked in the strangeness of it all. After disembarking, Winston followed a rough cattle path she had described, one that cut into the bushes and led into thicker woods. Without a watch, he estimated it was not yet 3 p.m. The bluebells grew so densely that he couldn't avoid crushing them with each step. Kneeling, he began gathering a bunch, partly to pass time, partly with a quaint romantic instinct to offer flowers when they met. The fragrance was faint and sickly, but it clung to him as he reached for one bloom after another. A sudden crack behind him, a twig snapping, froze his motion. He dared not turn. It could be her, or it could be surveillance. But fear itself would betray him, so he kept picking flowers until a hand rested lightly on his shoulder. It was Julia. She offered no words, only a subtle shake of her head urging silence. She swiftly parted the bushes and led him deep into the woods. Her steps were practiced, skimming the boggy patches without hesitation. Winston followed her, still clutching his awkward bouquet, his mind swirling with relief and inadequacy. Watching her lithe, confident movements and the flash of her red sash, he felt old and unworthy, dirty even. The bright sun, her health, the fresh air, all conspired to remind him of how little of life he had really lived. The soot of London clung to him like shame. Eventually, they arrived at the clearing she had spoken of, a small, hidden glade circled by saplings, entirely enclosed and shielded. It was a secret world, a place untouched by telescreens or microphones, at least as far as they could hope. She spoke softly, explaining her earlier silence. Even in such a remote spot, she held on to the fear that any voice could be captured and traced. But here, surrounded by young, narrow-trunked trees, she reassured him. No machinery could be hidden among them. She had been here before, and it felt safe. Winston was still too stunned to step closer, unsure of how to approach her. Julia smiled with a flicker of irony, her posture tall and self-assured. The bluebells tumbled from his hands to the ground as if by some unseen cue. He reached for her hand, noting with surprise that he had never really looked into her eyes before. They were a light brown, framed with dark lashes, and they looked back at him without fear or hesitation. Now that they stood face to face, exposed under the light of day, he confessed his vulnerabilities. He was almost 40. He was still technically married to a woman he despised. His body was marked by age and ailments, varicose veins, missing teeth. Julia dismissed his insecurities with a soft, "I couldn't care less." And in that moment, their bodies came together. There was no clear indication of who moved first, but soon she was in his arms, her lips pressed against his, her voice whispering words of endearment. "Darling, precious one, loved one." She melted into him, completely yielding, but Winston, accustomed to life devoid of passion, found himself overwhelmed. It was not lust he felt, but disbelief, pride, a stirring sense of being chosen. His body responded with numbness, his spirit with a reluctant bloom of joy. They sank onto the grass. She rested beside him, her arm wrapping around his waist with casual intimacy. "Never mind, dear," she said gently. "There's no hurry. We have the whole afternoon." And the place, she added, had been a chance discovery during a community hike. She had gotten lost but found sanctuary and now shared it with him. Here, one could hear any approach from 100 meters away. Winston, still dazed, asked her name. "Julia," she said. She already knew his, Winston Smith. Her tone carried a kind of mischievous pride in her detective work. Curious, she asked what he had thought of her before their first real interaction. Without flinching, he told the truth. He had hated her, he had wanted to hurt her, even to the point of fantasizing about murder. Her youth and vitality had seemed so emblematic of the party's purity that he had suspected her of being an agent of the thought police. Instead of recoiling, she laughed. It was the laugh of someone who knew how to play the part and had succeeded. She was not offended. If anything, she was amused. Her disguise, complete with the bright red sash of the anti-sex league, had clearly worked. She tore off the sash and tossed it onto a tree branch, a symbolic rejection of the party's control over her body and desires. Then, reaching into her overalls, she pulled out a small bar of chocolate, real chocolate, dark and rich and wrapped in silver. She split it and handed Winston a piece. The moment he caught its scent, memories stirred. Powerful, elusive, painful. The chocolate was nothing like the coarse, gritty stuff the party distributed. Its taste brought with it a flood of buried emotion, like an echo of a time long lost. He asked where she had found it. "Black market," she answered as if it were trivial. Her explanation of her public persona made it clear. She had mastered the art of survival. Outwardly, she was a model citizen, dutiful, cheerful, active in marches and youth leagues. But inside, she burned with rebellion. The duality was her armor. She played the game to stay alive. The chocolate melted on his tongue, but the troubling memory remained just beyond the edge of consciousness. Something about it pained him, something he couldn't fix. He looked at her again. She was so much younger, 10, maybe 15 years his junior. What could she see in him? Julia, unbothered by his question, replied that there had been something in his face, a knowing, a sign that he didn't belong, that he was against them, the party. She was good at spotting those who didn't fit in. Her hatred for the party was absolute, and she made no attempt to hide it. She spoke of the inner party with a venom that startled Winston. Her language was raw, vulgar, and jarring, especially for someone raised under the decorum of the regime. But it didn't repel him. It was a visceral form of protest, like a cough against poisoned air. Hand in hand, they left the clearing and wandered deeper into the woods, their bodies leaning into each other. They whispered, careful not to disturb the sacred quiet. Outside the sanctuary of the glade, their closeness persisted, and for the first time in Winston's life, perhaps, there was the faint glimmer of something that resembled human freedom. The entire encounter unfolded as if in a dream made real by defiance. Amidst the rustle of trees and distant bird calls, two souls touched, quietly and dangerously, in the shadow of a regime that had long declared war on love. In the filtered light of a golden May morning, a fragile hope begins to stir within Winston Smith. As he walks through a path veiled in bluebells, each footstep becomes more than just movement. It is a quiet assertion of life beyond control. The natural world he now enters contrasts sharply with the grim grayness of the city and the ever-present shadow of the party. Here in the countryside, he momentarily steps outside the reach of telescreens and slogans, finding himself surrounded not by suspicion, but by birdsong and the gentle warmth of spring. The very air seems to touch him with kindness, a reminder that not all in the world has been consumed by fear. It is May 2nd, and for the first time in years, Winston is walking towards something forbidden and fully human, a secret meeting with Julia. Yet even here, beneath the budding trees and golden light, he cannot shed his caution. The fear of hidden microphones lingers. Every rustle, every step, carries the weight of potential betrayal. Orwell presents this internal tension to show how deeply fear infiltrates the soul under tyranny. Even in solitude, Winston does not feel free. The language of the party has carved suspicion into his thinking. Concepts like own life, designed to make personal privacy seem perverse. The mere desire to be alone is seen as an act of rebellion, and the word itself is weaponized to control thought. When Winston boards a train filled with proles on their way to the countryside, he enters a world that feels disordered and alive. A family, stretching across generations, crams into the carriage with him, laughing and chatting, speaking openly of butter bought on the black market. Their lives, though dismissed by the party as inconsequential, hold a vibrant, messy authenticity. They are not watched as closely, and so they have managed to retain a sliver of spontaneity. For Winston, this chaos is a strange and beautiful kind of freedom. After he disembarks, he follows the trail Julia described. The bluebells are thick beneath his feet, and he kneels to gather a bunch of them, partly as a gift, partly as a quiet act of sentiment. In this small gesture, we see Winston's emerging desire for beauty and intimacy. But as he bends to pick the flowers, a sound behind him, a snap of a twig, sends a wave of fear through his body. Surveillance has conditioned him to expect danger at every turn. When Julia's hand finally rests on his shoulder, the tension breaks, but the fear does not vanish. She leads him swiftly through the underbrush, confidently dodging marshy patches, until they reach a small clearing surrounded by saplings. It is here, in this tiny circle of green, that they find a sanctuary, a space where no microphone could be hidden, where their voices can rise above a whisper. "We're all right here," she says, and for a brief moment, they believe it. What unfolds in that clearing is not just a romantic encounter, it is a deeply symbolic gesture of defiance. When Winston finally looks into Julia's eyes and says, "Now that you've seen what I'm really like, can you still bear to look at me?" It is not a question born of vanity, but of vulnerability. He presents himself as he is, damaged, older, flawed. Julia replies simply, "Yes," easily. Her acceptance is unflinching. In a world that demands masks and punishments for imperfection, This mutual recognition becomes an act of quiet rebellion. They do not need to be perfect. They only need to be true. Their physical closeness comes with no dramatic overture. She presses into him, calls him darling, and rests in his arms, and yet his first sensation is not desire but disbelief. It is pride, not passion, that fills him. The pride of being wanted in a world that has tried to erase want. He realizes how numb he has become to physical feeling, how long he has lived without tenderness. The party has not only crushed love, but also the very idea of it. Lying beside him, Julia reassures him, "There's no hurry, we have the whole afternoon." Her words carry more than scheduling. They suggest that here, in this sliver of stolen time, they can reclaim their humanity. She shares that she found this spot by accident during a community hike. Now it is their refuge, a place where footsteps can be heard long before danger arrives. When Winston asks her name, she tells him, Julia. She already knows his. Her eyes twinkle with amusement at her cleverness, her ability to find things out. When she asks what he had thought of her for their note passing, he confesses honestly, almost painfully. "I wanted to rape you and then murder you afterwards." In another world, such words would end the conversation. But Julia laughs, not because the feeling is acceptable, but because it confirms her disguise had worked. The red sash of the Junior Anti-Sex League, the cheerfulness, the obedient facade, it had all been a performance. She removes the sash, a small but powerful act, casting it aside like a snake shedding its skin. Then she pulls out a piece of real chocolate, dark and rich, wrapped in silver foil. She breaks it in half and gives Winston a piece. The taste unlocks something buried, a memory so vivid it unsettles him, though he cannot place it. This single taste is more than sweetness. It is a bridge to a self long buried, a life remembered not through words, but through sensation. It reminds us that the body remembers what the mind is made to forget. "Where did you get this stuff?" he asks. "Black market," she says. Julia, it becomes clear, is a master of duality. Outwardly, she is the ideal citizen. She marches, smiles, yells with the crowd. But beneath that, she is fiercely independent. "It's the only way to be safe," she tells him. And in that sentence lies the truth of her survival. She plays the game not out of loyalty, but as armor. Her real self is hidden behind the slogans. When Winston questions why she chose him, older, weary, broken, she says simply, "I knew you were against them." Them capitalized is not just the party, but the entire system of lies. Julia's insight is intuitive. She reads dissent in the eyes, in the silences. She is not driven by ideology, but by instinct. Her rebellion is not intellectual, it is personal, raw, and real. Her language too reflects that. She curses with a coarseness that startles Winston, who has long been used to the sterilized speech of party life. But her words are not vulgar for the sake of it. They are a reclaiming of speech itself. In a society where even thought is policed, to speak without a filter is a small revolution. Together they walk through the woods, arms around each other, whispering. Each step is a step away from fear and towards something freer. There are no crowds, no banners, no chants. Only two people choosing each other. In their hands, in their glances, is a quiet resistance. Love in this world is not just emotion, it is rebellion. And so Orwell leaves us with no grand escape, no tidy resolution. But he gives us something more intimate, the possibility that even in a world designed to destroy the soul, two people can find each other in the wild, in a clearing, in silence. They can speak freely. They can taste chocolate. They can remember. From this, we learn that even the smallest acts, seeing someone's eyes, offering a flower, speaking without fear, can become radical. That love, when forbidden, becomes a form of protest. And that freedom, even for an afternoon, even under trees too young to hide a microphone, still matters. In the rustle of leaves, in the softness of a touch, in the choice to love someone despite fear, we see that hope has not yet died. It is merely hiding, waiting for a clearing. In the muted shade beneath hazel branches, Winston and Julia stood close, cocooned by a natural canopy that filtered the sunlight into trembling patches of gold. Though the sun warmed their faces, there was a softness to the moment, a suspended stillness where breath and fear mingled. "Don't go out into the open," Julia had whispered. "There might be someone watching." And so they stayed hidden, half embraced by leaves and shadows, leaning into the illusion that for this moment, they were safe. Winston's eyes wandered across the field beyond, and a strange sensation of recognition unfurled within him. A slow, surreal shock that tugged at something long buried. The landscape, with its ragged hedgerows and an old worn path crossing through pasture, was not unfamiliar. Though he had never physically stood in this spot before, he had dreamed it. The elm trees swayed gently on the horizon, their dense leaves fluttering like the hair of women. Somewhere just beyond the edge of vision, he imagined a stream curving quietly through the grass, with slow-moving fish gliding in green pools. He turned to Julia, lowering his voice. "Isn't there a stream somewhere near here?" She nodded, confirming his vision. "It's at the edge of the next field, actually. There are fish in it, great big ones. You can watch them lying in the pools under the willow trees, waving their tails." Winston smiled softly. "It's the Golden Country. Almost," he murmured. When she asked about the term, he brushed it off. "It's nothing really, a landscape I've seen sometimes in a dream." But it was more than that. For Winston, the Golden Country symbolized a forbidden purity, an unspoiled freedom his subconscious had clung to, even as the party tried to erase it. It was a place where sunlight didn't accuse, where grass didn't report footsteps, where love could exist unrecorded. Then Julia whispered again, "Look." A thrush had landed nearby on a branch just 5 meters away, close enough for them to see the speckled pattern of its breast. It had perhaps not noticed them, cloaked as they were in shade. The bird stood in a patch of sun, wings tucked in, head bowed slightly in a kind of reverent motion, and then it sang. The sound broke the silence with a stunning liquid force. Its song was not repetitive, but wildly varied, flowing in rich, unbroken streams of melody. It paused only to shift its wings or catch its breath, before pouring out more music with an effortless virtuosity that neither Julia nor Winston could look away from. They clung to each other, captivated. To Winston, the sound was unexplainable, irrational, and therefore sacred. For whom, for what, was that bird singing, he wondered. It had no mate nearby, no rival. There was no visible reason, and yet it sang as if the entire world were listening. He imagined for a brief second that there might be a hidden microphone somewhere after all, that perhaps a party technician with bug-like features was listening not to their whispers, but to the bird. But the song, with its purity and power, washed over Winston until those thoughts faded. It was as though the music itself was a substance, soaking into his skin, mingling with the filtered sunlight, drowning fear and leaving only feeling. He let go of questions. He let go of resistance. The only reality now was Julia's waist beneath his arm, the warmth of her body, the softness of the moment. Their lips met, not like before with urgency or uncertainty, but with something different, a slow, steady merging. Her mouth melted into his, her body pressed into him. And for the first time, it wasn't rebellion or desperation that moved them, but tenderness. Their kiss ended with a shared sigh, deep and exhausted. Just then the thrush took fright, flapping into the air with a startled clatter, and the world resumed its breathing. Winston turned to her. "Now," he whispered. But Julia shook her head. "Not here," she replied. Come back to the hideout. It's safer." And so, crackling softly over twigs and undergrowth, they slipped back to the hidden clearing. Once within its circle of saplings, she stopped and turned. They were both flushed and breathless, but she smiled at him with a playfulness that carried no fear. And then, as if guided by a script written in Winston's dreams, she reached for the zipper of her overalls. The gesture was swift and unashamed. In one fluid motion, she stepped out of the party's uniform, cast it aside with theatrical grace, and stood before him. In that moment, her act seemed more than physical. It was symbolic. A single motion that defied everything: ideology, repression, obedience. It was as though, in shedding those garments, she had also stripped away 1,000 years of control. A civilization crumbled in her motion. Her body was pale and luminous in the sun. But Winston's eyes didn't move to her figure. He stared into her freckled face, where a faint, bold smile lingered. He knelt, reaching for her hands, his heart racing. "Have you done this before?" he asked. Her answer was casual. "Of course, hundreds of times, well, scores of times anyway." "With party members?" "Yes, always with party members." "With members of the inner party?" he asked. Julia's tone changed slightly, disdainful. "Not with those swine, no, but there's plenty that would if they got half a chance. They're not so holy as they make out." At her words, Winston felt a thrill. The idea of moral decay within the party, of secret sin hiding behind banners and slogans, electrified him. If even the inner party was vulnerable to desire, then the entire system might be weaker than it appeared. He would have gladly infected them all with disease, if it meant pulling down their hypocrisy. He longed for the rot beneath the surface. To him, corruption was hope. He drew Julia closer so they knelt face to face. "Listen," he said with intensity, "the more men you've had, the more I love you. Do you understand that?" She nodded, unfazed. "Yes, perfectly." "I hate purity," he said. "I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones, Hector." Julia smiled. "Well, then I ought to suit you, dear. I'm corrupt to the bones." And he looked at her as though she were salvation. "You like doing this?" he asked. "I don't mean just with me. I mean the act itself." "I adore it," she said. That was what Winston needed to hear. This was not about romance or even about Julia. It was about something larger. About primal instinct, about the animal force that could shatter the party's brittle architecture. He lay her down gently among the fallen bluebells, and this time there was no hesitation. Their bodies moved not in secrecy, but in defiance. What they did was not just personal, it was political. It was rebellion in the truest sense, not with slogans, but with skin and breath. Afterward, they lay beside each other in a silence that was soft and complete. The sun pressed heavier through the leaves. Their chests rose and fell in unison, and the scent of crushed flowers mingled with the warm air. Winston pulled her overalls partway across her body and held her close. Within moments, they both drifted into sleep. Winston awoke first. He sat up slowly, watching her sleep, her hand curled beneath her freckled face. She was not conventionally beautiful. There were faint lines near her eyes, and her features were strong rather than delicate. But to Winston, she was profoundly real. Her dark hair, thick and soft, framed a face that did not hide. For the first time, he noticed he didn't even know her last name or where she lived. And yet, she had let him see her in every way a person could be seen. As he looked at her, a strange tenderness rose in him, protective, almost paternal. Her body, strong and sure just moments ago, was now relaxed in sleep, childlike in its vulnerability. He reached out and brushed the cloth aside again, tracing the smooth curve of her side. But the emotion he had felt earlier while the thrush was singing did not return. That sweetness had passed. What lingered now was not sentiment, but something harder, something with purpose. He realized then that even their intimacy was not free from the shadow of the party. There was no such thing anymore as pure desire or pure love. Everything was stained by fear, by defiance, by hate. Even lust was a weapon now, not a joy. Their embrace had not been a surrender. It had been a strike. Their climax had been a protest. This was not merely a private act. It was a blow against the system. Their bodies had declared, "We are not yours." And that was the beginning, not of love, but of revolution. In this chapter of 1984, Orwell gently guides us into one of the most emotionally profound and symbolically charged moments of the entire novel. The setting is quiet, muted sunlight filtered through hazel branches, the whisper of wind through the trees, the hush of two people hiding not only from the party, but from years of fear, conditioning, and silence. Julia's whispered warning, "Don't go out into the open. There might be someone watching," reflects the ever-present caution that defines their world. And yet, behind the boughs, they stand close, suspended in a fragile peace. For once, they are together not in panic but in stillness. As Winston surveys the landscape before them, something deep and almost dreamlike stirs within him. He experiences a strange, quiet shock. The realization that he knows this place, not from experience but from a vision, a recurring dream of freedom that has haunted his unconscious mind. When he murmurs, "It's the golden country," almost, he is not just naming a place. He is naming a longing. This golden country, with its swaying elm trees and meandering footpaths, its imagined stream and gliding fish, is not only a pastoral escape from the grayness of Oceania, it is a symbol of untouched inner freedom, a space where the human spirit, though battered, still breathes. Julia's soft confirmation that a stream really does exist nearby, there are fish in it, great big ones, only deepens the sense that something sacred has survived beneath the surface of oppression. It is in this moment of near reverie that Julia draws his attention to the branch above them. "Look," she whispers, and Winston's eyes land upon a thrush just 5 meters away. The bird, speckled and still, seems to bow to the sun before releasing an astonishing song. A flood of melody pours from it, unpredictable, unrepeated, pouring into the silence with a kind of joyous abandon. The bird, unobserved and unpressured, sings not for a mate or a rival, but simply because it can. And in that moment, Winston and Julia cling to each other, mesmerized. He wonders, for whom, for what, was that bird singing, and finds no answer. Perhaps that's the point. In a world where every action must serve a function, where every word must be calculated, the thrush's song is a miracle of meaninglessness. Its beauty lies in its defiance of purpose. It sings into nothingness, and in doing so it becomes a symbol of everything the party cannot control. Spontaneity, joy, the raw expression of life. The song washes over Winston like sunlight and water. He stops thinking and begins to feel. The bird is not a rebellion in the political sense, but it is rebellious in the purest sense. It exists for its own sake, unafraid and unapologetic. In that flood of song and sun, Winston and Julia share a kiss, not like the rushed, hungry kisses of before, but something gentler, deeper. There is no calculation, no urgency. Their mouths meet in quiet understanding, and when they pull apart, they do so with a shared sigh. The world, for a moment, holds its breath. The bird, startled, flies away in a flurry of wings, and the spell is broken. Winston whispers, "Now," but Julia gently counters, "Not here, come back to the hideout, it's safer." And so, hand in hand, they retreat through the underbrush, back to the clearing, surrounded by saplings. There, with breath still uneven, but laughter in her smile, Julia turns to face him. What happens next is something Winston had once only dared to dream. She unzips her overalls, steps out of the party's uniform, and casts it aside with effortless grace. In that moment, Orwell tells us, a whole civilization seemed to be annihilated. Julia's act is not just one of physical undressing, it is an act of spiritual stripping down, a rejection of everything the regime has tried to make her. She becomes, in that instant, entirely herself and entirely free. Winston does not look first at her body. Instead, his eyes are held by her face, freckled, bold, softly smiling. There is something deeply human in this gesture. Not objectification, but reverence, Visto. He kneels, takes her hands, and asks with trembling honesty, "Have you done this before?" Julia answers with calm indifference, "Of course. Hundreds of times. Well, scores of times anyway." And with that, the conversation slips into dangerous territory, made sacred by its transparency. She admits to sleeping with the party members. Not inter-party swine, as she calls them, but others, those who also lived under the weight of enforced celibacy, ideology, and fear. Far from recoiling, Winston is thrilled. Her experience is not a blemish to him. It is a light. In her so-called corruption, he sees proof that the party is not omnipotent. The cracks are there, people are breaking the rules. He even goes so far as to say, "The more men you've had, the more I love you." In this upside-down world, purity is not virtue. It is submission. "I hate purity," he tells her. "I hate goodness. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones." And Julia, with a shrug of mischief and truth, replies, "Well then, I ought to suit you, dear. I'm corrupt to the bones." This exchange, uncomfortable as it may seem, reveals something essential about Orwell's message. In a society where virtue is manufactured and enforced, true rebellion may lie in reclaiming the primal. They are not celebrating degradation. They are refusing to let the party define what is right. They are reclaiming the right to be messy, inconsistent, passionate, alive. Winston asks one final question. "You like doing this? I don't mean just with me. I mean the act itself." And Julia says without hesitation, "I adore it." That answer, simple as it is, completes the moment for him. It tells him that what they are doing is not just about connection. It is about reclaiming the right to want, to enjoy, to choose. And with that, he gently lowers her to the ground. Among the crushed bluebells, their bodies come together not in lust or fear, but in shared rebellion. This time there is no difficulty, no awkwardness, only a soft and steady unity. They are not just making love, they are striking a blow. Afterward they rest. The sun seems heavier now and the forest is quieter. Their breathing slows, their limbs soften, and they drift into sleep. In this sliver of the world, they are safe. Unspoken but deeply felt is the knowledge that this will not last. And yet, they have claimed it for themselves. When Winston wakes, he watches Julia sleeping. Her face, freckled and strong, is at peace. She is not classically beautiful, but he sees her now with different eyes. He realizes he does not even know her last name or where she lives. And still he feels something close to love, a tenderness that is not based on possession or perfection, but on the simple act of having seen and been seen. Yet even in this quiet hour, Orwell will not allow sentimentality to triumph completely. Winston thinks again about what their union means. It was not just intimacy, it was an act of war. You could not have pure love or pure lust nowadays, he reflects. No emotion was pure. Their lovemaking was not a gift, it was resistance. And in this world, resistance is everything. Through this chapter, Orwell teaches us that rebellion need not always come in loud forms. Sometimes it is a kiss in the shade. Sometimes it is a girl singing with her body. Sometimes it is the courage to say, "I adore it," in a world that says you must not. The party wants to make people into ghosts, efficient, passionless, obedient. But Winston and Julia, for a single afternoon, refused. Their bodies spoke what their mouths dared not. "We are not yours." And in that, perhaps, lies the seed of every revolution. In the quiet of the woods, away from telescreens and slogans, Winston and Julia do more than break the rules. They reclaim their humanity. Their love, raw and defiant, is no longer just about desire, but resistance. Yet even here, the shadow of the party lingers. Can intimacy survive under surveillance? If this story stirred you, like a songbird echoing in still air, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and follow the channel as we dive deeper into their dangerous dance with truth and tyranny.